Brazil has declared 3 days of mourning for the football legend Pele. The Brazilian icon, who won 3 World Cups, has passed away from cancer at 82. Pele found fame as a teenager with the football club Santos and became internationally known when he scored twice as Brazil beat Sweden in the 1958 World Cup final. He won the competition again in 1962 and a third time in 1970, where his mesmerizing play cemented his iconic status. For many in Brazil and around the world, he was much more than a sportsman.
Sao Paulo's Albert Einstein Hospital, where football legend Pele passed away. His fans gathered outside to bid farewell and mourn the loss of the man Brazilians called the King.
I came to pay my respects, my goodbye. In fact, the King never dies. For me, he did not die. I came to pay my respects.
People also came out to Urbano Caldeira Stadium, home to Pele's former football club, Santos. Rio's statue of Christ the Redeemer was lit up in his honor. And tributes were laid outside Maracanã Stadium.
For me, soccer is in mourning. We had our defeat. Brazil lost the World Cup. And we have the news of the death of our king. But life goes on. I'm very sad, but Pele was history. A legend.
The football great also inspired athletes in other sports.
He had a great impact on athletes in general. Everyone wanted to be the Pele in their sport. It became a joke.
Brazil is now beginning 3 days of mourning for a footballer who transcended the game.
David Trihorn is the director of the Netflix documentary Pele and met the footballing legend many times, and we welcome him now. David, you knew him personally. What was he like?
Yeah, I was very lucky and privileged, I guess, and honoured to have spent quite a bit of time with him. I originally met him sort of 15 years ago, I think, on some filming work, and then again a few years later. And then we did a big film with him for Netflix. Look, Pele was an absolute gentleman. People talk about him as a great player and a great man, and he was a great man. He would come into the room, and in that period, he was already a little bit physically incapacitated, but he would light up a room. He wanted to get to know everyone. He wanted to chat to everyone. I think he loved being the king. He had such a warm personality and a warm way about him. He wanted everyone to feel this warmth he had, I think.
Yeah, that warmth certainly came through. I'm sure there are lots of nuggets to choose from, but what in his biography did you find most compelling?
I think we actually found most, we looked for because he had this career that was just one big high, we were actually looking for the lows within it, and it was very, very difficult to find. So I think what we found most interesting compelling was the fact that, well, I think we all remember Pele now for 1970. That was the tournament that stamped his legacy and made Brazil what it is today, the country of football. Perhaps more so than even 1958 when he was a teenager. But I think what we didn't realise was there was this genuine chance he wouldn't play in 1970. He'd retired from the national team. He got fed up with playing for Brazil, and they had to coax him back. But I don't think if Pele had 1970, or had not had 1970, we'd talk about him in the same way today.
Without question, Pele was an iconic footballer, but people say he transcended the sport, and I imagine you agree.
I think he definitely transcended the sport, and I think we have to remember the era he came up through. You know, this was the birth of football as big business. This is the birth of football as a commercial entity. And in many ways, Pele was the first modern superstar. And you've got this guy who sort of fell into it beautifully as well. He had this incredible smile. He looked amazing. He was incredibly adept at proving these iconic moments on the biggest stage. You know, he would score in World Cup finals. He'd never go missing on those big occasions. And I think he just came along at the right time. The sport needed someone like that, and he was the first to come along and be this superstar. So I think often we'll have the debate about who's the greatest. And it's something in our film we never really wanted to get into, this sort of cross-generational debate. I think one thing we'd always say is that Pele's the comparison point. You know, first it was Eusebio, then Cruyff, then Maradona, then Messi and Ronaldo, but they're always being compared to Pele. And I think the one thing we can always say, whether he's the greatest or not, that's for other people to decide. But he was the first. He was Elvis. He was Neil Armstrong. No one can follow in his footsteps.
If it's possible to even articulate such a thing in 20 seconds, what's his legacy?
I think his legacy, more than anything, is what he did for his country. Before 1958, Brazil wasn't the country of football. After 1970, it became the country of football, and we all know Brazil today as this country of football, and that's largely down to one man, Pele.
Well said. Documentary director David Trihorn, many, many thanks.
Thank you.
With me now is Mark Meadows from DW Sports. Mark, I have to say, when I was growing up, there was one indisputable greatest player ever, and his name was Pele. What impact did he have on the sport?
Well, he changed it completely. I mean, he is the only man to win the World Cup 3 times, and I think in the men's game, that record will stay. I mean, I've just been in Qatar for the World Cup, and you saw with France how difficult it was to retain the trophy. They fell at the final hurdle to Argentina, but Pele's Brazil side was the last team to do it in 1958 and 1962. And for him to kind of transcend 3 different decades in international football is quite incredible. I mean, precocious talent in 1958, then established star in 62, and then to come back in 1970 with probably the best World Cup team we've ever seen in the Brazil side in 1970 and win it again is quite incredible. But of course, he was a lot more than just a footballer. He was a sports minister in Brazil as well. And if we're talking about sport in general, he's up there with Muhammad Ali, Serena Williams, Usain Bolt, the true sporting greats. And of course, he was also a black icon. I mean, we have to think back to the 1950s, and racism was a problem in Brazil between richer white Brazilians and black Brazilians and mixed race Brazilians. And he sort of helped bridge that gap. He made white Brazilians realize that they could support a black Brazilian and that the Brazilian football team was everything to them.
Excellent point. I imagine I know the answer to this question, but how is the football universe reacting to his death?
I mean, it's quite incredible. I've never seen anything like this. Every single top player has tweeted or put an Instagram post up about Pele. He's that important. Just that 4-letter word. Everybody knew Pele. Even people in countries where football isn't so popular, they knew Pele. I mean, Neymar, who is his kind of successor as Brazil's top player, he said, before Pele, 10 was just a number. And that's a nod to the position where Pele played. You know, the number 10 is the great, iconic position in football, the player who has the skill, who has the guile. And without Pele, we wouldn't have had Neymar, we wouldn't have had Maradona, we wouldn't have had Totti, and we wouldn't have had Lionel Messi. So that shows the impact he had on the game. Now, Messi, of course, has also commented. He just tweeted a photo of them together and said, rest in peace, while Cristiano Ronaldo, our other modern great, has called him the eternal king.
We only have about 15 seconds, but Mark, any details for the preparations?
Yeah, I mean, the funeral will take place in Santos, his hometown. It will happen on Monday and Tuesday. His coffin will be placed on the centre circle so fans can come and see it. And then the casket will be taken on Tuesday to a local cemetery for burial.
The king is dead at 82. Mark Meadows, DW Sports, many thanks.